My name is Michael Carter, and this is the story of how Thanksgiving 2023 didn't just ruin a holiday. It obliterated everything I thought I knew about my family, my future, and myself. They say hindsight is 20/20, but even looking back now, 6 months later, I'm still finding pieces of the wreckage I missed the first time around. I should have seen the signs. God knows they were there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to disaster. The strange glances that passed between my father and sister when they thought I wasn't looking. The hushed phone conversations that abruptly ended when I walked into a room. The way Dad's voice would catch slightly when he talked about the future or making sure everyone's taken care of. The nervous energy that seemed to radiate off my sister Rebecca whenever we were all together, like she was carrying around some terrible secret that was eating her alive from the inside out. But I was drowning in my own problems at the time. 6 months unemployed from Peterson Engineering after 20 years of loyal service, 20 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and putting the company before everything else, only to be told in a sterile conference room that my position was being eliminated due to restructuring. The severance package barely covered 2 months of mortgage payments on the house Jennifer and I had stretched ourselves thin to buy in the good neighborhood, with the good schools for our boys. Speaking of Jennifer, my marriage was hanging by the thinnest of threads, 20 years together, and we'd never fought the way we were fighting that fall, not screaming matches. We were both too exhausted for that, but the cold, calculated arguments of two people who'd forgotten how to be on the same side. She blamed me for not seeing the layoffs coming, for not having a backup plan, for not being the provider she'd married. I blamed her for not understanding that some things are beyond your control, for making me feel like a failure every time I walked through our front door. The boys, Tyler 16 and Alex 14, had started avoiding home altogether. Tyler spent most afternoons at his girlfriend's house, while Alex buried himself in video games and spoke to us in grunts and one-word answers. I told myself it was normal teenage behavior, but deep down I knew they could feel the tension crackling through our house like electricity before a storm. So no, I wasn't paying attention to the subtle signs of crisis brewing in my childhood home on Elmwood Drive. I was too busy trying to keep my own life from completely falling apart. The house on Elmwood Drive, God, where do I even begin with that place? It wasn't just a house. It was the foundation upon which my entire understanding of family, security, and legacy was built. A 1950s colonial with white shutters that Dad repainted every 3 years without fail. A wraparound porch where Mum used to sit with her morning coffee, and that massive oak tree in the backyard that had been my playground, my fortress, my escape from the world for the first 18 years of my life. Dad bought that house in 1985 for $78,000, a fortune for a young machinist with a wife and 2 small children. I remember him telling the story 100 times over the years, how he and Mom had walked through it with the realtor, how she'd fallen in love with the built-in china cabinet in the dining room, how he'd worked overtime for 6 months straight to save up for the down payment. It was their American dream made manifest, their proof that hard work and sacrifice could build something permanent, something that would outlast them. Mom had turned that house into a home, with the kind of attention to detail that's become extinct in our instant gratification world. She'd spent weekends at estate sales and flea markets, collecting the depression glass that filled the kitchen windows with rainbows when the morning sun hit it just right. She'd planted the rose garden that bloomed from May through October, filling the air with a sweetness that meant home to me more than any other sensory memory I carry. She'd hung family photos in the hallway, school pictures, Christmas mornings, graduations, weddings, creating a visual timeline of our lives that told the story of who we were, where we came from. After Mum died 5 years ago, Dad had maintained everything exactly as she'd left it. The depression glass still caught the morning light, the roses still bloomed each spring. The family photos still lined the hallway, though Dad had added a few more recent ones. Tyler's freshman year football team, Alex's 8th grade graduation, Rebecca's promotion to bank manager. It was like a shrine to the family we'd been, the life we'd built together. And it was supposed to be mine someday. Not just mine, Rebecca's too, of course, but mine to pass down to Tyler and Alex, mine to fill with grandchildren's laughter, mine to maintain and protect the way Dad had maintained and protected it for nearly 40 years. It represented security in an uncertain world, roots in an increasingly rootless society, continuity in a culture that seemed to throw everything away the moment it became inconvenient. That Thursday morning, November 23rd, 2023, started like most mornings had for the past 6 months, with me lying in bed at 6 a.m., staring at the ceiling, mentally reviewing my dwindling bank account and the stack of rejection letters growing on my desk. The job market for 38-year-old engineers was brutal, especially when most companies could hire 2 fresh college graduates for what they used to pay 1 experienced professional. Jennifer was already up, moving around the kitchen with the efficient, cold precision she'd perfected since my unemployment began. No good morning kiss, no casual conversation over coffee, just the sound of cabinet doors closing a little too firmly and the coffee maker gurgling like it was choking. "What time are we supposed to be at your dad's?" she asked without looking at me as I entered the kitchen. 4 o'clock, same as every year. "And we're bringing what again?" "Sweet potato casserole, I told you yesterday." "Right." She poured her coffee into her travel mug, the one with her law firm's logo that had become a symbol of everything that was working in her life, while everything in mine was falling apart. "I might be a little late, I've got some briefs to review." "On Thanksgiving?" She finally looked at me, and the expression on her face was one I'd been seeing more and more lately, a mixture of disappointment and barely contained frustration. "Some of us don't have the luxury of unlimited free time, Michael." The words hit their intended target. 6 months of unemployment had made me hypersensitive to any reference to my current status, any suggestion that my time was worth less because no one was paying me for it. I wanted to snap back, to remind her that I'd spent the last 20 years working my ass off so she could build her career without worrying about the mortgage or the boys' expenses. But we'd had that fight before, and it never ended well. "I'll make the casserole," I said instead. "Tyler's coming with us, right?" "As far as I know. Alex is going to his friend's house after dinner." "Of course he is." She shouldered her laptop bag. "Make sure Tyler wears something decent. And Michael, try to keep the conversation light today. Your father doesn't need to hear about our problems." "Our problems. Not my problems, not the unemployment that was slowly strangling our marriage, but our problems." It was a small concession, but I clung to it like a life preserver. After Jennifer left for the office, because apparently corporate law never sleeps, not even on Thanksgiving, I started working on the sweet potato casserole. It was Mom's recipe, handwritten on an index card that was now stained and yellowed with age. I'd made it every year since Mom died, trying to replicate not just the taste, but the love she'd somehow baked into every dish she made. As I peeled sweet potatoes, my mind wandered to previous Thanksgivings, the chaos of Mum's kitchen as she orchestrated a meal for 12 people, the sound of football on the TV, mixing with family arguments about politics or whose turn it was to say grace, the way Dad would carve the turkey with the ceremonial precision of a surgeon, while Mom fussed over side dishes that were already perfect. Those days felt like they belonged to someone else's life now. Mom was gone. The extended family had scattered to different states and different lives, and the intimate gathering that remained, just Dad, Rebecca and her family, and my family, had felt increasingly strained over the past few years. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the natural evolution of a family growing older and growing apart. Or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on but could feel in the spaces between words, in the careful way conversations were navigated around certain topics, in the way Dad's eyes had started to look anywhere but directly at me when we talked about the future. Around noon I was in the garage trying to fix the chain on Alex's bike, a mindless task that gave my hands something to do while my mind churned through job applications and budget calculations when my phone buzzed. "Rebecca." "Mike, are you at Dad's yet?" Her voice sounded off, strained in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Not yet, still dealing with this damn bike chain." "Why, something wrong?" There was a pause long enough for me to stop what I was doing and give the phone my full attention. No, nothing's wrong. Just get there soon, okay?" "Beck, what's going on? You sound weird." "I don't sound weird, it's Thanksgiving, you know? I want everything to go smoothly." But that was the thing. Rebecca never wanted everything to go smoothly. She was the laid-back one in the family, the one who showed up 10 minutes late with store-bought rolls and a shrug, the one who laughed when the gravy was lumpy or the pie crust burned. I was the perfectionist, the one who stressed about timing and presentation and making sure everything lived up to Mom's standards. "Is Dad okay?" "Dad's fine. He's just fine." "Look, I have to go. Tom's asking me something." "Just get there soon, all right?" The line went dead, leaving me staring at my grease-stained hands and the half-repaired bike chain, a growing knot of unease forming in my stomach. The 20-minute drive to Dad's house had become a ritual of its own over the years. Down Maple Street, past the elementary school where Rebecca and I had walked every day for 6 years, through the old downtown that was slowly gentrifying with trendy coffee shops and boutique stores that none of the long-time residents could afford. Left on Harrison, right on Oak, then the final turn onto Elmwood Drive. But that day, the familiar route felt different. Maybe it was Rebecca's strange phone call, or maybe it was my own heightened anxiety about everything else in my life, but I found myself paying attention to details I usually missed. The Johnsons' house on the corner had a for sale sign in the yard. They'd lived there for 30 years, raised 4 kids in that little ranch house. The Patels had put up their Christmas lights already, a riot of color that Mom would have thought was too early, but secretly enjoyed. The closer I got to Elmwood Drive, the more my chest tightened. It was ridiculous. I was a grown man having an anxiety attack about Thanksgiving dinner at my childhood home. But there was something in Rebecca's voice, something in the careful way she'd chosen her words, that had triggered every instinct I'd developed over the years, for sensing when people weren't telling me the whole truth. I pulled into Dad's driveway at 2:30 p.m., parking behind Rebecca's SUV. The house looked exactly the same as it had for the past 20 years, white shutters freshly painted, the front porch swept clean, Mum's wind chimes singing softly in the November breeze. But somehow, it felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile, as if it were holding its breath. The familiar smell of roasting turkey and sage greeted me at the front door, along with something else I couldn't identify, a heaviness in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks and changes everything. "Michael, son." Dad appeared in the hallway, wiping his hands on Mum's old apron, the one with the faded strawberries that she'd worn for every major meal she'd cooked in this house. He clapped me on the back with more force than usual, and the gesture felt desperate somehow, like he was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. Dad looked older than his 71 years. Not just older, smaller somehow. His shoulders sagged in a way I'd never noticed before, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of worry rather than age. His hair, which had gone completely white in the 5 years since Mom died, looked thinner, and his clothes hung on his frame like they belonged to a larger man. "Hey, Dad. You feeling all right? You look tired." "Just getting old, I guess. You know how it is." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come on in, help me with the gravy. Your sister's been fussing over it for the past hour, but you know how she gets." Actually, I didn't know how she got, because Rebecca had never fussed over gravy in her life. She was the sister who showed up with a bag of rolls from the grocery store bakery and a bottle of wine, not the one who stressed over lumpy gravy and perfectly timed side dishes. I followed Dad into the kitchen and immediately felt the tension that had been building all morning crystallize into something almost tangible. Rebecca was at the stove, stirring a pot of mashed potatoes with the kind of aggressive precision usually reserved for hostile takeovers. Her husband Tom was leaning against the counter, nursing a beer and staring out the window at the backyard with the expression of a man who would rather be anywhere else on earth. Their kids, Emma, 12, and Jake, 10, were sitting at the kitchen table, both absorbed in their phones with the desperate intensity of children trying to make themselves invisible during adult tension. Usually, they'd be running around the house, exploring the basement, climbing the oak tree, begging to help with dinner preparations. Today, they looked like they were afraid to make any sudden movements. "Beck." I leaned over to kiss her cheek, and she turned her head slightly, giving me her temple instead. "Everything smells incredible." "Thanks." She didn't look up from the potatoes. "How's Jennifer? Is she coming?" "She'll be here around 4. Had some work stuff to finish up." "On Thanksgiving?" This from Tom, who had finally turned away from the window. There was something in his tone, not quite judgment but a careful neutrality, that suggested he knew more about my marital problems than I was comfortable with. "You know how lawyers are," I said, forcing a casual tone. "The law never sleeps." Rebecca made a sound that could have been agreement or could have been something else entirely. "Dad, did you check the turkey? I think it might be ready to come out." "Already checked it, sweetheart. Another 30 minutes or so." Dad was moving around the kitchen with an efficiency that seemed forced, like he was trying to stay busy to avoid conversation. "Michael, grab yourself a beer. Tom brought that IPA you like." I opened the refrigerator and immediately noticed something that made my stomach clench. It was almost empty. Not holiday meal preparation empty, where all the space is taken up by covered dishes and leftover containers, but genuinely, worryingly empty. A carton of milk that was 3 days past its expiration date, a few condiment bottles, some leftover takeout containers. This wasn't the refrigerator of a man preparing to host Thanksgiving dinner. It was the refrigerator of someone who'd stopped cooking for himself months ago. "Dad, where's all your food?" "Oh, you know me, I don't eat much these days. Rebecca's been bringing me groceries when she can." When she can? Since when did my father, a man who had prided himself on his independence for 7 decades, need his daughter to bring him groceries? I looked at Rebecca, who was now stirring the potatoes with enough force to potentially drill a hole through the bottom of the pot. "Beck, maybe we should talk." "We will," she cut me off. "After dinner, let's get through dinner first, okay?" But I was tired of being managed, tired of feeling like everyone around me was walking on eggshells, tired of the sense that important conversations were happening just outside my earshot. "No, let's talk now. What's going on? You're acting weird. Dad looks like he hasn't eaten a real meal in weeks, and this whole house feels like a funeral parlor." The kitchen went dead silent. Even Emma and Jake looked up from their phones, sensing that the adult tension had finally reached critical mass. Tom cleared his throat. "Mike, maybe what?" I was getting angry now, the frustration of 6 months of unemployment and marital problems and general life chaos finally finding a target. Maybe I should just shut up and pretend everything's fine. Maybe I should ignore the fact that my family is obviously keeping something from me. "Michael." Dad's voice was quiet but firm. "Not now, please. When then? When is it going to be the right time to tell me whatever it is you're all tiptoeing around?" Rebecca slammed the spoon down on the counter so hard that both kids jumped. "Fine. You want to know? Dad's broke, Mike. Completely, utterly broke. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. He's 3 months behind on payments, and he's been living on credit cards and pride for the past year. Happy now?" The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs and leaving me gasping for breath. "What?" "The medical bills from Mum's cancer treatment," Rebecca continued, her voice rising with each word. "The insurance didn't cover everything, not even close. And then Dad had that heart attack last year. Heart attack." I turned to stare at my father, who was suddenly unable to meet my eyes. "What heart attack? You told me it was just a routine checkup." Dad's hands were shaking as he reached for a dish towel. "It wasn't serious, Michael, just a small one. They put in a stent and I was fine." "A stent? Dad, you had heart surgery and didn't tell me?" "You were dealing with your own problems," he said quietly. "The layoffs at your company, the stress with Jennifer. I didn't want to add to your burden." The kitchen was spinning around me. My father had had a heart attack, and no one had thought to inform me. My family had been in financial crisis, and I'd been completely oblivious, wrapped up in my own relatively minor problems, while the foundation of everything I thought I could count on was crumbling. "How bad?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Rebecca and Dad exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "Bad," she said simply. "Really, really bad." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of revelations that remapped my entire understanding of my family's situation. Dad sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, Mom's chair, the one with the faded cushion that she'd embroidered with roosters back in the 80s, and began to speak in the slow, careful way of a man confessing his sins. The medical bills from Mum's cancer treatment had been staggering, even with insurance. The experimental treatments, the specialists, the months of care that the insurance company deemed not medically necessary had cost over $180,000 out of pocket. Dad had refinanced the house to pay for them, taking out a second mortgage that doubled their monthly payments. "I would have done anything to save her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. If there had been a treatment in Switzerland that cost $1 million, I would have found a way to pay for it." After Mom died, Dad had struggled to keep up with the payments on his machinist's pension. When the factory closed 2 years ago and his pension was cut by 30%, he'd started using credit cards to bridge the gap. When the credit cards maxed out, he'd taken out a line of credit against the house. Then came the heart attack last spring. Dad had been at the grocery store loading bags into his car when the pain hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. He'd driven himself to the hospital, driven himself because he didn't want to pay for an ambulance, and collapsed in the emergency room parking lot. "Mrs. Henderson found me," he said, referring to our elderly next-door neighbor. "She was visiting her daughter in the hospital, saw me fall. Probably saved my life. The emergency surgery to insert the stent had cost $78,000. The follow-up care, the medications, the cardiologist visits, another $23,000 over the course of 6 months. Dad's Medicare had covered some of it, but the gaps in coverage had swallowed what little savings he'd managed to rebuild after Mom's medical expenses. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked for the 4th time. "Dad, I could have helped. We could have figured something out." "With what money?" Rebecca's voice was sharp with frustration. "Mike, you've been unemployed for 6 months. Your own house is underwater. You're behind on your own mortgage payments." How did she know about our mortgage situation? I looked at her carefully, and she had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Jennifer mentioned it to Tom at Emma's birthday party," she said. "She was worried about you, about the stress you were under. She needed someone to talk to. So my wife had been discussing our financial problems with my brother-in-law, and my sister knew more about my marriage than I thought she did. The hits just kept coming." "We could have consolidated," I said weakly. "Taken out a loan against my 401k or—" "Michael." Dad's voice was gentle but firm. "Your 401k has been your backup plan since the layoff started. I wasn't going to let you destroy your future to fix my mistakes." "Your mistakes?" "Dad paying for Mom's cancer treatment wasn't a mistake. Having a heart attack wasn't a mistake." "No, but buying this house was." The words came out so quietly, I almost didn't hear them. Stretching ourselves so thin to live in a neighborhood we couldn't really afford, taking on a mortgage that ate up 60% of my income, thinking that somehow I'd always be able to make it work because that's what men do, right? We make it work. The bitterness in his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. Dad had always been the optimist in the family, the one who believed that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. To hear him talking about his life, about the house that had been our family's pride and joy, as a mistake was almost more devastating than learning about the financial crisis. "So what's the plan?" I asked. "Refinance again? Declare bankruptcy? What?" Another look passed between Dad and Rebecca, and I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my stomach. "Mike," Rebecca said carefully, "there's more we need to tell you." "More? What could possibly be more than this?" She took a deep breath, the kind you take before jumping off a cliff or ripping off a Band-Aid or telling someone news that's going to change their life forever. Dad already found a solution. The house sold last month. The world stopped. Actually, physically stopped. Like someone had pressed pause on reality and forgotten to hit play again. I could hear the turkey timer going off in the background, could smell the sage and butter and all the familiar scents of Thanksgiving, but none of it seemed real. Nothing seemed real except for the 3 words that kept echoing in my head. The house sold. Sold? My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. "What do you mean sold?" "I mean sold, Mike, closed on October 15th. The new owners take possession January 1st. I looked around the kitchen, at Mum's strawberry-patterned apron hanging on its hook, at the collection of cookie jars lined up on the counter, at the family photos covering the refrigerator door like a timeline of our lives. All of it temporary now. All of it already gone, even though it was still here. "You sold our house." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, a statement of betrayal that hung in the air between us like smoke. "I sold my house," Dad corrected gently. "Michael, I know how much this place means to you, to all of us, but I didn't have a choice." There's always a choice. I was on my feet now, pacing the small kitchen like a caged animal. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a rapid drumming that threatened to drown out everything else. I could have helped. We could have taken out a loan or refinanced or something. This house has been in our family for almost 40 years, and now it's not. Rebecca's voice was steady, but I could hear the tears underneath it. "Mike, do you think this was easy? Do you think Dad wanted to sell? Do you think any of us wanted this? Then why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you give me a chance to save it? Because you can't save everything." The words exploded out of her with a force that startled everyone in the kitchen. "God, Mike, you always think you can fix everything, control everything, make everything work out the way it's supposed to. But sometimes life just sucks. And sometimes bad things happen to good people. And sometimes there's no solution that makes everyone happy." Tom was holding Emma, who had started crying. Jake was staring at his phone screen, but I could tell he wasn't really seeing it. The kids hadn't signed up for this family drama, and here we were traumatizing them with our adult failures. "I need some air," I said. "Michael, please." Dad started to stand up. "No, just give me a minute. I need to think." I walked out the back door onto the deck that Dad had built the summer I turned 16. It overlooked the backyard where Rebecca and I had played as kids, where Mom had tended her roses, where Tyler and Alex had spent countless summer afternoons climbing the oak tree and playing catch with their grandfather. The November air was crisp and clean, and I filled my lungs with it, trying to clear my head. But all I could think about was the chain of events that had led us here. Mum getting sick, Dad mortgaging the house to pay for her care, the heart attack that nobody had bothered to tell me about, the months of financial struggle that I'd been completely oblivious to while I wallowed in my own relatively minor problems. How had I missed it? How had I been so wrapped up in my own life that I'd failed to notice my father was drowning? Eventually, Rebecca came outside to get me. Her face was blotchy from crying, and she looked older than her 35 years. "The turkey's ready," she said. "Jennifer just pulled up." "I don't think I can do this, Beck. I can't sit at that table and pretend everything's normal." "You have to, for Dad, for the kids. We can finish talking about this later, but right now we need to get through dinner." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, looking harried and professionally perfect in her charcoal grey suit. She took one look at my face and then at Rebecca's, and I watched her do the rapid calculation that lawyers are so good at, assessing a situation, identifying the key players, determining the best strategy for navigating whatever crisis was unfolding. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Family stuff," Rebecca said quickly. "We'll explain later. Right now we just need to eat." The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in dysfunctional family dynamics. We sat around the dining room table, the mahogany table that had been my grandmother's, that Mom had polished every week with lemon oil until it gleamed like a mirror, and pretended that everything was fine. Dad carved the turkey with the same ceremonial precision he'd used for the past 20 years, but his hands shook slightly, and the slices were uneven. Rebecca passed dishes with aggressive efficiency, filling everyone's plates before they could object. Tom tried to make conversation about the Lions' chances this season, while Jennifer nodded politely and checked her phone under the table. Tyler, who had arrived just as we were sitting down, sensed the tension immediately and retreated into typical teenage sullenness. He answered direct questions with monosyllables and spent most of the meal pushing food around his plate with the air of someone who would rather be literally anywhere else. The kids, Emma and Jake, were unnaturally quiet, still processing the adult emotional explosion they'd witnessed in the kitchen. Even Emma, who was usually chatty and animated at family gatherings, seemed to understand that this was not the time for normal conversation. I tried to eat, but everything tasted like sawdust. The turkey that Dad had probably spent hours preparing, the mashed potatoes that Rebecca had stirred with such violent intensity, the sweet potato casserole I'd made from Mom's recipe, all of it might as well have been cardboard. The dining room itself felt different now that I knew it was temporary. The china cabinet where Mum had displayed her good dishes suddenly looked like a museum exhibit. The family photos on the mantel, graduation pictures, wedding pictures, Christmas mornings stretching back 20 years, felt like evidence from a life that was already over. "So, Michael," Jennifer said, clearly trying to inject some normalcy into the proceedings, "any promising leads on the job front?" It was an innocent question, the kind of thing she might ask on any normal Thanksgiving. But in the context of what I'd just learned about Dad's financial crisis and the sale of the house, it felt like salt in an open wound. "A few interviews next week," I lied. There were no interviews scheduled. My resume was disappearing into the black hole of online applications, and the few networking contacts I had left were politely declining to return my calls. "That's great," Dad said with forced enthusiasm. "What companies?" "Just, some engineering firms in the city. Nothing definite yet." The conversation died there, leaving us all to focus on our plates and the sound of silverware against china. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5 o'clock, its familiar sound now carrying an undertone of finality. How many more times would we hear that clock? Would the new owners keep it, or would it end up in an estate sale bought by strangers who would never know that it had marked the hours of our family's life for nearly 40 years? "This turkey is delicious, Dad," Rebecca said, her voice too bright, too cheerful. "You outdid yourself this year." "Your mother's recipe," Dad replied. "I followed it exactly the way she wrote it down." "She had the best recipes," Jennifer agreed. "I still use her stuffing recipe every year." "Remember that year she forgot to turn on the oven?" Tyler spoke up unexpectedly. "And we didn't realize until like 6 o'clock, so we ended up ordering pizza?" For a moment the mood lightened. We all remembered that year. Tyler would have been about 8, when Mom had been so distracted by hosting Rebecca's in-laws for the first time that she'd forgotten to actually turn on the oven. The turkey had sat there for 4 hours at room temperature while we all waited for it to cook, and by the time we realized her mistake, it was too late to start over. "She was so embarrassed," Dad said, smiling at the memory. "But you kids thought it was the best Thanksgiving ever, because you got to eat pizza and watch football instead of sitting through a formal dinner." "She made sure that never happened again," Rebecca added. "Every year after that, she'd triple-check the oven." "She was always like that," I said. "One mistake, and she'd build an entire system to make sure it never happened again." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, remembering Mom and that chaotic, perfect Thanksgiving 13 years ago. It was the first normal moment we'd had all day, and I could feel everyone relaxing slightly, settling into the familiar rhythm of family storytelling. Then Tyler, who was always too smart for his own good, asked the question that shattered our temporary peace. "So, when are we going to start having Thanksgiving at our house? This place is getting kind of small for everyone." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer shot me a look that clearly said, "Handle this," while Dad suddenly became very interested in cutting his turkey into smaller and smaller pieces. Rebecca dropped her fork, and the clatter against her plate sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Tyler shrugged with the casual cruelty of teenagers. "I just mean, when you and Mom inherit this place, are you going to renovate it or sell it and get something bigger? Because Emma and Jake's family is growing, and if Alex ever brings his girlfriend around, it's going to be pretty crowded." The kid had no idea what he'd just stepped into. He was thinking like a normal teenager from a normal family, making normal assumptions about inheritance and family continuity and the way life was supposed to work. He had no clue that the house he was casually discussing renovating had already been sold to strangers, that the inheritance he was taking for granted had evaporated months ago, that the foundation of his understanding about family and security was about to collapse. "Tyler," Jennifer said quietly, "maybe this isn't the best time." "For what? It's just a question." Tyler looked around the table, finally registering the tension that had returned with a vengeance. "What's wrong with everyone?" I looked at Dad, whose face had gone pale. I looked at Rebecca, who was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had turned white. I looked at Jennifer, who was clearly trying to figure out how to extract herself and Tyler from whatever family crisis was about to explode. And then I made the decision that probably changed everything. I decided to tell him the truth. "Tyler, we need to talk about something," I began, but before I could continue, Rebecca's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Mike, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't tell my son that his grandfather's house, the house he's been counting on inheriting someday, has been sold out from under us." "Michael, please." Dad's voice was barely a whisper. "Not like this." But I was past caring about not like this. I was tired of secrets, tired of being managed, tired of finding out about major family crises third hand while everyone tiptoed around me like I was made of glass. "Tyler, your grandfather sold the house last month. There's no inheritance. There's no family legacy to pass down. It's gone." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Tyler stared at me with the blank incomprehension of someone whose world had just shifted on its axis without warning. Jennifer's face went white, and she reached for Tyler's hand across the table. "What do you mean sold?" Tyler asked. "I mean sold. To strangers. We have to be out by January 1st. But this is Grandpa's house. This is our house." "Not anymore." Tyler looked around the table, searching for someone to tell him this was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but the truth. But the adult faces staring back at him confirmed what I'd just said. "Where's Grandpa going to live?" "With us," Rebecca said quietly. "He's moving in with Tom and me." "And where are we going to have Thanksgiving next year?" It was such an innocent question, such a perfectly Tyler question, practical and immediate and cutting right to the heart of what this meant for his daily life. And none of us had an answer for him. What happened next was the kind of family fight that leaves scars for generations. It started quietly, with Jennifer's controlled lawyer voice asking careful questions about timeline and finances, and why no one had thought to inform her that her father-in-law was in crisis. But it escalated quickly when she realized the full scope of what we'd been dealing with and what I'd been hiding from her. 6 months, she said, her voice getting sharper with each word. "Your father has been in financial crisis for 6 months, and you're just telling me now." "I didn't know," I protested. "They didn't tell me either." "But you knew something was wrong. You had to have known. People don't just sell their family home overnight, Michael. There had to have been signs." She was right, and that made it worse. There had been signs. Dad looking thinner, the empty refrigerator, the way he'd started talking about making sure everyone's taken care of, in that vague, ominous way that should have set off alarm bells. I'd chosen not to see them because I was too wrapped up in my own problems to deal with anyone else's. "Don't lecture me about family responsibility," I snapped back. "You've been working 60 hours a week for the past 6 months. When exactly was I supposed to discuss this with you? During the 5 minutes a day when we're both conscious and in the same room? That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? It's not fair that Dad mortgaged his house to pay for Mum's medical bills. It's not fair that he had a heart attack and didn't tell me because he didn't want to burden me. It's not fair that my family has been falling apart while I was worried about getting a job interview." Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'm going to Alex's house." "Tyler, wait." But he was already grabbing his jacket from the hall closet, already halfway out the door. I heard his car start in the driveway, heard the sound of gravel under tires as he backed out too fast, and drove away from the mess we adults had made of what should have been a normal family holiday. "Great job, everyone," Jennifer said. "Really excellent parenting on display here." "Don't blame this on us," Rebecca shot back. "Tyler's 16. He's old enough to hear the truth about what's happening to his family." "The truth? The truth is that his grandfather is moving out of the house where Tyler's spent every major holiday for the past 16 years, and nobody thought to prepare him for that. The truth is that his father has been unemployed for 6 months, and his parents' marriage is hanging by a thread, and now he gets to add family financial crisis to his list of things to worry about." She was right, and we all knew it. But knowing she was right didn't make hearing it any easier. "Jennifer," Dad said quietly, "I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted anyone to find out." "How did you want us to find out, Frank? When the moving truck showed up, when Tyler came looking for you at Christmas and found strangers living here?" Dad flinched at the harshness in her voice. Jennifer had always been respectful to him, even fond of him, but right now she was in full lawyer mode, cross-examining a hostile witness. I wanted to tell everyone together after dinner. I had a speech prepared. A speech? Jennifer laughed, but there was no humor in it. Well, by all means, let's hear the speech, Frank. Let's hear how you plan to explain to your grandsons that their inheritance just evaporated. That's enough. I was on my feet now, my own anger finally finding its target. Don't take this out on him. Dad didn't choose to get sick. He didn't choose for Mom to need experimental cancer treatments. He did what he had to do to take care of his wife, and then he did what he had to do to take care of himself. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you should think about what you'd do if one of us got sick. The silence that followed was profound. Jennifer stared at me across the table, and I could see the exact moment when the implications of what I'd just said hit her. What would we do if one of us got sick? Our insurance was through her law firm, but it was the same kind of insurance Dad had. Good enough for routine care, but full of gaps and exclusions that could bankrupt a family if someone got seriously ill. This can't be happening, she said quietly. But it is happening, Rebecca said. It's been happening for months, and now we all have to figure out how to deal with it. Tom, who had been silent through most of this, finally spoke up. The kids should go play outside or something. They don't need to hear all this. Emma and Jake had been sitting frozen in their chairs, wide-eyed and terrified, watching the adults in their lives fall apart. Tom was right. They'd already been traumatized enough for one day. Come on, guys, Rebecca said, her voice gentler now. Go watch TV in the living room. We'll call you when it's time for dessert. They practically ran from the dining room, probably grateful to escape the toxic atmosphere that had settled over what should have been a celebration. Once they were gone, Dad cleared his throat and began to speak in the slow, deliberate way of someone who had been rehearsing these words for weeks. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you all this for months, he began. The truth is, I made some bad decisions. I should have asked for help earlier. I should have been more honest about the medical bills, about the state of my finances, about how hard it's been since your mother died. Dad, Rebecca started, but he held up his hand. Let me finish, please. I need to say this. He took a shaky breath. I sold the house because I had to. The bank was going to foreclose anyway, and this way, at least I got enough money to pay off all the debts and have a little left over for whatever comes next. How much? Jennifer asked. How much is left over? Dad looked down at his hands. After paying off the mortgages and the credit cards and the medical bills, about $30,000. $30,000. The house that had been worth $400,000 at the height of the market, the house that was supposed to be our safety net, our legacy, our insurance against an uncertain future, had been reduced to $30,000. That's not enough to buy anything else, I said. That's not enough to rent an apartment for more than a year. I know that's why Rebecca and Tom have offered to let me move in with them. I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time all day. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, older than her years. Taking care of Dad, a proud, independent man who had never needed taking care of in his life, was going to be a massive responsibility. Financial, emotional, logistical. Her life was about to change dramatically, and she'd accepted that burden without consulting anyone, without asking for help. Beck, you can't handle this alone. I won't be alone. Tom's on board and the kids love their grandfather. We'll make it work. But what about when he needs more care? What about when what, Mike? When he gets sicker, when he can't take care of himself anymore? We'll figure it out then. What else are we supposed to do? The question hung in the air between us. What else were we supposed to do? I could offer to take Dad instead, but my marriage was already strained to the breaking point, and adding another layer of stress and responsibility might finish it off completely. We could look into assisted living facilities, but those cost thousands of dollars a month, money none of us had. I should contribute, I said, to his care, to the expenses. When I find a job, Michael, Dad interrupted gently, you need to take care of your own family first. Tyler and Alex need you to be stable, need you to get back on your feet. I don't want my problems to make yours worse. Your problems are our problems, Dad. That's what family means." "No," he said firmly. "Family means doing whatever it takes to make sure the next generation has it better than you did. I failed at that. I'm not going to compound the failure by dragging you down with me." The bitterness in his voice was heartbreaking. This man who had worked 2 jobs to put Rebecca and me through college, who had sacrificed his own dreams and ambitions to provide for his family, who had mortgaged his future to pay for his wife's medical care, saw himself as a failure. "Dad, you didn't fail. The system failed you. The insurance system, the healthcare system, the economic system that makes it impossible for ordinary people to survive a major illness without going bankrupt." Maybe, but the result is the same, isn't it? I'm 71 years old, I have $30,000 to my name, and I have to depend on my children to have a roof over my head. That feels like failure to me. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of difficult conversations and painful revelations. Jennifer called Tyler and convinced him to come back, but the mood never recovered. We ate dessert, Mum's apple pie recipe that Rebecca had made from memory, but it tasted like obligation rather than tradition. The practical details were overwhelming. Dad would need to pack 30 years of accumulated belongings into whatever space Rebecca and Tom could spare in their house. Furniture would need to be sold or donated. The garden that Mum had tended for 2 decades would be left to strangers who might not appreciate the carefully planned succession of blooms that provided color from spring through fall. Most heartbreaking of all were the small, personal items that couldn't be easily relocated. The height marks on the kitchen door frame where Dad had measured Rebecca and me as we grew up, and later Tyler and Alex. The loose board on the back porch that creaked in a specific way that meant home to all of us. The view from the kitchen window that Dad had looked at every morning for nearly 40 years, while drinking his coffee and reading the newspaper. "What about Christmas?" Tyler asked as we were getting ready to leave. "Are we still doing Christmas here?" Dad and Rebecca exchanged a look. "The new owners said I could stay through the holidays," Dad said. "So yes, Christmas will still be here, but it will be the last one." The drive home was silent except for the sound of tires on asphalt and Tyler's quiet sniffling from the back seat. Jennifer stared out the passenger window, and I could practically hear her mental calculator running, trying to figure out how Dad's situation would affect our own precarious finances. When we got home, Tyler went straight to his room and closed the door. Jennifer poured herself a large glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, probably trying to lose herself in work rather than deal with the emotional carnage of the day. I stood in our own living room, looking around at the furniture we'd bought on credit, the flat-screen TV we were still making payments on, the family photos that documented our life in this house that we might not be able to keep much longer. For the first time, I understood exactly how Dad had felt, the weight of responsibility, the fear of letting everyone down, the suffocating pressure of trying to maintain a lifestyle that was always just slightly beyond our means. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Are you okay?" I started to type "I'm fine," but deleted it, started to type "This is a lot to process," but deleted that too. Finally, I just wrote, "Are you okay?" Her response came immediately, "No, but we'll figure it out. We always do." But would we? For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure. The house on Elmwood Drive had been our anchor, our constant, the place we could always return to no matter what else fell apart in our lives. Now it was gone, and with it a certain kind of security that I hadn't even realized I was counting on. I thought about Tyler's question, where would we have Thanksgiving next year? Rebecca and Tom's house was nice, but it was smaller, and it didn't have the history, the accumulated memories of decades of family gatherings. It would be different, and different felt like loss. I thought about Dad, probably sitting alone in his empty house at that very moment, surrounded by boxes he hadn't started packing yet, trying to figure out how to condense 71 years of life into whatever space he'd be allotted in someone else's home. I thought about Mom and what she would have said about all this, probably something practical and optimistic, something about family sticking together and making the best of difficult situations. But I couldn't hear her voice anymore, couldn't summon up her particular brand of gentle wisdom when I needed it most. The house felt different when I went to bed that night, smaller, more fragile, less permanent. I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds, the furnace kicking on, the old windows rattling slightly in their frames, Jennifer's breathing beside me, and wondered how many more nights I'd be able to count on hearing those sounds. Outside it started to rain, a steady November downpour that matched my mood perfectly. Thanksgiving was over, and instead of feeling grateful for what I had, I felt like I was drowning in what I'd lost. Not just Dad's house, but the illusion of security, the belief that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you could build something permanent in an impermanent world. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to help Dad pack up his life. I would have to find a way to contribute to his care while managing my own family's financial crisis. I would have to explain to Alex what had happened and help both boys understand that the future they'd been counting on, the inheritance, the family home, the sense of continuity that connects one generation to the next, had just evaporated. But tonight, I just lay in the dark and listened to the rain, mourning the end of the only Thanksgiving tradition our family had ever known, and wondering what we were going to be grateful for next year. 6 months later, I'm sitting in a coffee shop downtown, finally employed again. Not the engineering job I'd hoped for, but steady work that pays the bills and lets me contribute to Dad's care. The house on Elmwood Drive has new owners now, a young couple with 2 small children who have already torn out Mom's rose garden to make room for a playset. Rebecca calls every few weeks with updates. Dad is adjusting to life in their house, though it hasn't been easy. He misses his independence, misses the routine he'd maintained for 40 years, misses having his own space. But he's helping with homework and teaching Jake how to fix things around the house, and slowly, they're all finding their new normal. Tyler and Alex still ask about Grandpa's house sometimes, usually when they're feeling nostalgic or when something reminds them of holidays past. I try to focus on the memories rather than the loss, try to help them understand that home isn't really about a place, it's about the people you share it with. Jennifer and I are in counseling, working through the stress and communication problems that the crisis revealed in our marriage. Some days are better than others, but we're both committed to rebuilding what was damaged. As for me, I'm still processing what I learned that Thanksgiving Day. Not just about Dad's financial situation, but about the fragility of the life I'd thought was so secure, about the importance of paying attention to the people you love, about the difference between the security you think you have and the security that actually exists. The American dream that Dad had worked so hard to achieve, home ownership, financial stability, something to pass on to the next generation, had proven to be more fragile than any of us realized. But maybe that's not the real tragedy. Maybe the real tragedy is that it took losing everything for us to finally start talking honestly with each other. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving again, and we're having it at Rebecca's house. It will be different, smaller, quieter, without the familiar rhythms and traditions we'd maintained for so many years. But we'll be together, and we'll be honest with each other, and maybe that's worth being grateful for. After all, home isn't really about the building you live in. It's about the people who know your story, who stick with you when everything falls apart, who help you figure out how to rebuild when the life you'd planned disappears overnight. Dad was right about one thing. Family is about making sure the next generation has it better than you did. But maybe better doesn't mean a bigger house or a larger inheritance. Maybe it means teaching them to pay attention, to ask for help when they need it, to understand that love is more permanent than real estate. Maybe it means teaching them that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you can't afford to lose. That Thanksgiving changed everything for our family. It cost us the house, but it gave us something too. The truth, painful as it was, and the chance to build something new from the pieces of what we'd lost. Some years, that has to be enough.